Hello and welcome to the Refugee Welcome Collective Lunch and Learn series. In these sessions, we aim to bring interesting and timely information to you, supporters of refugees. Whether you are a volunteer, community sponsor, resettlement agency staff, a local advocate, or just someone who is interested in learning more, we hope that you enjoy today's session. Partners in Mobilization, How Houston Welcomes Refugees and YMCA Houston Activate Volunteers and Donations. We here at Refugee Welcome Collective collaborate with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly learning sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance for sponsors, practitioners at resettlement agencies, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. Next slide. As a reminder for everyone joining the Lunch and Learn today, there is a control panel in the upper right-hand corner of your screen that will allow you to submit questions through the questions box. There will be ample time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. Everyone on today's webinar is automatically muted. However, if you have any tech issues, please raise your hand through the control panel or submit a question in the questions box so that we can assist you. Additionally, a recording will be sent to everyone today following the webinar. And this brings us to our presenters for today. Our presenters are Morgan Bass. Morgan is the program manager at Houston Welcomes Refugees. Miranda Hurtado Ramos, who is community support specialist at YMCA Houston, and Hannah Quillen, executive director at Houston Welcomes Refugees. They are here today to tell us about their organization's great work and their unique collaboration in welcome. Thank you so much for joining us all, and I believe Miranda is going to start us off.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. So my name is Miranda Hurtado Ramos. I'm the community support specialist at YMCA International. We are a refugee resettlement agency here in Houston, and we're an affiliate of USCRI. My role is basically to help out with community sponsorships, partnerships with organizations like Houston Welcomes Refugees and others that provide us with in-kind donations and other forms of support. And yeah, other ways we connect to the community. If you can go to the next slide. Yes, the next one after that. Okay, so I'm from YMCA International Services. We are part of YMCA of Greater Houston, but we are a resettlement agency. At our office, we provide services to refugees, immigrants, and other vulnerable populations through over 10 different programs, including resettlement and immigration services and many, many more. We are in Houston. It's a huge city. We are the 4th largest city, and we are the most diverse city in the country, as we were just discussing earlier in this webinar. So that's part of why it's so important to really get our community activated in helping the clients that we serve. So as the resettlement agency, for those of you who aren't on the agency side, we provide all of those basic services, you know, all of the checklist that's on paper, the school enrollment, the medical stuff, the housing, all of those basics. And then HWR, Houston Welcomes Refugees, provides some of the essential services as well as some extra stuff, and we'll get into that in a minute.
Okay, well, I can jump in here. I'm Hannah Quillen. I'm the executive director of Houston Welcomes Refugees. And as an organization, we were founded in 2016 by 2 moms who kind of saw a gap in organizations here in Houston of actually welcoming refugees. There's a lot of nonprofits in our city that serve refugees maybe through ESL programs or mentoring programs for kids and after-school programs. But how can we mobilize the community to really welcome refugees well? And that's where HWR steps in. And you can change the next slide, Grace. And so our mission really is to ease the resettlement process for refugees coming to Houston by mobilizing invested, caring volunteers to welcome refugees to our city. But through that, we hope that we're fostering hope amidst this crisis. And we do that through our 3 programs. So the first program that we run is community education. As Miranda mentioned, we are the most diverse city in the US, and most Houstonians do know that fact, but a lot of Houstonians don't realize that that diversity comes from our refugee population. So we seek to educate the community. We do this by presenting at local churches, local schools, local organizations, and we call them orientations, our community education orientations. They last about 1 hour, and they talk through who refugees are, what is the refugee crisis look like. So we talk through some kind of myths and go through the facts of refugees. We also talk about the resettlement process. Many people don't realize what that resettlement process looks like. We talk about the differences between immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers. We talk about that whole process, just really educate Houstonians on that. And we also open up the Bible and say, what does God's word say about welcoming refugees? And we do a loss simulation exercise as well to really get the Houston community to understand maybe the crisis that a refugee may feel when they move here. We talk about how refugees often arrive with very few belongings, maybe a duffel bag for the entire family. We talk about how they're not coming as an entire family unit oftentimes, and when they come to the new city, they don't have a community that's just built in for them, right? And just their need for friendship. And so that's where our other two programs really come in. And Grace, you can flip to the next slide. These slides are looking funny on my screen, so I hope they're looking okay for everyone else's. So I just talked about our community education program, but now I'm going to talk about the two that are on the left. So our first is our starting essentials program. We have welcome kits that are just those starting essentials. I often refer to them as a wedding registry. These are 9 kits that cover every kind of room in the apartment. So think bedding kits for with sheets and pillows, all the way to kitchen kits. So pots, pans, cutting boards, tea kettles. We have bathroom kits, school kits, personal care kits, 9 total kits. And by the community donating these brand new items, we then provide them to refugee families. And while this is something that Miranda and her team would have to provide, we actually take that off their plate. We provide those to the families, which puts cash back into the families' pockets. And then on the day a family does arrive, so let's say Miranda tells us there's a family arriving next Tuesday evening. On Tuesday at lunch, we would deploy a move-in team of about 4 people from the community that would go into the apartment before the family arrives and set it up. So they would put sheets on the beds that YMCA has already provided, unpack those pots and pans, put them in cabinets. They would also stock the fridge and the pantry with groceries, and they would leave a hot meal. We have a relationship with a local Afghan restaurant to provide halal meals. They would go pick up those meals and put them in the fridge. So when the family does arrive, they will walk into a home, an apartment that's been fully set up for them. Groceries have been provided. And then I do want to note that, groceries, that's a big one. I think if I went with my typical grocery list to stock a Congolese family's grocery fridge, it would not be what they wanted. So our team provides a very specific grocery list based on the nationality of the family. So we're making sure we're providing foods that the family actually wants to eat, foods that they're used to eating. And then that brings me to our third program, which Morgan will talk about more extensively, but this is the heart of who we are as an organization. It is truly why we were founded. So our friendship program. We mobilize welcome teams of about 4 to 6 people. They can be larger depending on the size of the family they'll be serving. But these welcome teams commit to walk alongside one family for 6 months. So this starts by greeting them at the airport with signs that say, welcome home, we're glad you're here. And then it's just friendship for 6 months. And our hope and our prayer is that these friendships last a lot longer than those 6 months, but they are committed for a minimum of 6 months to us and to the YMCA. So this looks like a lot of different things. Like Miranda says, they do not take the place of the caseworker. The caseworker has found the apartment. They're doing school enrollment. They're doing Medicaid, food stamps, all of those things. We come in as truly friends. This means sitting with them, having tea, hearing their stories, sharing your story, going to the zoo, going and enjoying Houston. It can mean helping with school enrollment. It can be making sure they're ready and equipped to start start their first day at school. It can be helping them with resume building and things like that, but really that's kind of the basic. It's very basic. It's friendship. That is the key piece of that, and it is connecting them to the resources as well, but doing that in tandem with the caseworker. So that is a little bit on our 3 programs. I want to talk a little bit about the success of our programs and partnerships. So we have been partnered together since day 1 of Houston Welcomes Refugees founding in 2016. We started by kind of knocking on YMCA's doors, these 2 moms, and said, we have this idea. Could we just help 5 families in 2016? And they were gracious enough to say yes to our offering our services. And in that first year in 2016, we served 12 families, a total of 60 refugees. And as you can see, our partnership has just grown. Starting in about 2019, we served 100% of YMCA families with our Starting Essentials program. And in 2020, that number dropped, but we still served 100% of YMCA's family. Everyone knows 2020 was a COVID year, just less arrivals into the city. And then in 2021, we had a record-shattering year for YMCA, for sure as an organization, but HWR as well. We served 836 refugees alongside YMCA. And in 2021, HWR and YMCA served 37% of Houston's refugee arrivals. And we're so grateful for that. And this year, our target is to hit a lot more than that, which we're on track for. But we really couldn't do the work that we do without the work that YMCA does. Our organization, our heart is to welcome and serve the refugees in our city. That would be very hard to do if we did not have a close resettlement agency partnership. So I'm going to let Miranda talk a little bit more about what that partnership looks like from her side of things.
Sorry, I was muted. You can go over to the next slide, Grace. So as Hannah said, it's really important for us to have a close relationship. And in a couple minutes, I'm also going to talk about the challenges we face, but you'll see that the key to everything is flexibility and constant communication. But the benefits from the agency side, there's numerous benefits. I can't even begin to say all of them, but client integration is a big one. So, you know, when we put our clients in apartment complexes, a lot of them, they want to be around their community, especially if they're from a culture that has an existing community in Houston, like Afghans, for example. They want to be in an apartment complex with other Afghans. And beyond that, sometimes even with Afghans of their own ethnic group, they might have cousins, brothers, sisters, whatever, who are already here. And with that in mind, sometimes there's they don't necessarily get the opportunity to, we're a huge city, to be able to see different parts of the city, to be able to understand, you know, different things about our city and about life in the United States. So it's really helpful to have that, because the case manager, as I said, the case manager's job is pretty clear cut. It's these services, I mean, and above and beyond usually as well, but there are this list of services, and that list of services alone is like more than 40 hours a week, right? And so to be able to have somebody else who's able to take that client to the grocery store, for example, and you come to a new country, you don't know where the foods you want are, you don't know how the interactions are supposed to go at the library, on the bus stop, at the grocery store. These small kind of things are what we find welcome teams can really help out with. Move-in process, that's one of the other ones of the 3 programs that Hannah discussed, Starting Essentials. That's a huge deal. So not only are they helping out by providing those physical items, by donating those items, but also physically moving them into the apartment, which means our operations team does not have to spend the time to source those items or to move them from our office to an apartment, to put them all in place. It makes it really easy. And the way we do that is, as you'll see in the other column, the shared documents have updated communication and data. So for this move-in process, particularly once we started seeing increased numbers of arrivals and using a lot more temporary housing when the Afghan influx was happening, or when it started rather, that kind of shared documentation was of the utmost importance. We have a shared Google Doc. There's many different ways that people can do this, but for us, we found what works best to have a shared, a Google Sheet rather, and we'll have like family name, case number, you know, all the information, and then move-in date, where they're moving, what do they need, when do they need it, all of that. And it's updated constantly on either side, so we can both see what's going on. We're always texting or calling each other if there's last minute things. As for those of you who work in the resettlement side know, there's always something that's going to happen. The apartment's not going to go through, the, you know, whatever, the flight's delayed, something is happening.
Yeah, I
So
may say, Miranda, yeah, the other folks on the call are probably volunteers, and they'd probably agree as well that for volunteers, things oftentimes don't go as expected in refugees.
Exactly. So having that constant communication and not being like, oh, I feel so bad, this apartment isn't ready yet, oh my God, what am I gonna, nope. That's part of our partnership, is understanding how each side of this works, right? So I understand how volunteers work to a certain extent, right? And they understand that how resettlement works to an extent. We're not experts at each other's jobs, but having that understanding so we're able to move through. Having case manager support is always important. You know, having the case manager able to they don't have to be there for the first meeting of those teams, but to be able to say, okay, this is what the role of this volunteer is for the newcomer family, and kind of establish that for the family, understand what's going on. And when there are certain services that the welcome team can help out with that are not mandatory, like school enrollment is one of them. Having the case manager able to send over those documents that are needed, or to say, hey, welcome team, can you help me with this service? It's really helpful. The other big benefit is volunteer mobilization arm. As volunteers know, as resettlement staff know, it's a lot of work. Volunteers are super helpful, and we would not be able to do so many things that we do without our volunteers. But getting those volunteers, putting them in some sort of a system, having everything all in order is, you know, a job. Houston Welcomes Refugees does their own training. You know, we through YMCA have certain mandatory trainings about child abuse and a background check. That's very minimal. It doesn't tell you really anything about what we do at our office with refugees. Houston Welcomes Refugees through their community orientations, as well as their more in-depth trainings, which Morgan, I believe, we'll get to later in this presentation, do a lot of that work for us. And they really do a great job of walking the volunteers through every step of the way. And capacity for additional programming. Resettlement funding is all in its own little boxes, right? We work on 1,000 different grants, and that money has to be used for that purpose, and it's all got to be tracked and everything. You know, sometimes an agency might have additional funding through its own independent fundraising, but a lot of times we find our money is kind of tied up, and our services are kind of tied up in certain boxes, right? Having an organization that is separate from us, they are their own nonprofit 501c3 organization, is great. They can do volunteer appreciation. They can do, you know, different enrichment activities. They can provide, like, for example, they were able to, through funds of their own, they provide a certain amount of hours of interpretation through the phone, through an interpretation service here, so that volunteer families can communicate easier with newcomers who don't speak any English. We as an agency wouldn't really be able to do that, or it would be difficult to be able to do that. That's just a great thing. And then I think I'm running over my time a little bit, but the community outreach and education itself is super helpful. And a best practice of this really is to have clear guidelines all the time, and they can be flexible. For example, we had guidelines before our, you know, Afghan influx, and then all of a sudden our case managers were drowning in cases, right? So we found we really needed volunteers to kind of step up. Once that happened, we were able to make guidelines on which services, okay, who's able to provide which service, what's the protocol for this, and then have that on paper for the volunteers. I am going to go on to our challenges and how we address those. So there's always challenges with anything. I find that those benefits I discussed earlier far outweigh whatever challenges we encounter. But managing expectations, I think, is one of our big challenges throughout all of this, from the volunteer side, from the client side, or newcomer side, everywhere. The best approach to this is, as early and often as possible, to reinforce kind of the realities of different situations. So what I mean by that is, through the trainings that Morgan's going to discuss, they talk about, okay, what kind of apartment are these people going to live in? What kind of jobs might you expect them to be their first job, regardless? And, you know, it's a hard reality that we have to talk about. But for those of us who are raised in the U.S., we might not think about every day, okay, I was a doctor here in the U.S. and I had to move to another country. I would expect to be able to be a doctor there. No, you might have to work at Walmart, right? And that is something that a lot of folks raised here in the U.S. don't always think about. So managing those kinds of expectations is really important from clients as well, to be able to, having the case manager be able to talk to the client and say, hey, this is what the role of this volunteer is. They're here to support you. They're here to, you know, to be your friend. What they're not here to do is just give you stuff all the time, or, you know, drive you everywhere, or whatever the situation is. It's important to just reinforce that throughout. Last minute changes, as I said before, there's always something, right? There's always something with housing, with arrivals, whatever. And the best approach to that is constant communication and flexibility and just being understanding. You know, it helps that Houston Welcomes Refugees is always telling their volunteers about what we're doing on the agency side. So they're making it clear to them, hey, stuff is really hard over there. and it's not like we're just, you know, oh, you know what, I don't feel like moving in a house today. Oh, we're not going to do it. It's, you know, they reinforce that to their volunteers. So they help them understand why we're doing these things. And there's also multiple opportunities provided. To be able to be flexible like that is really helpful. So for example, we have a move-in scheduled today. Oh my God, it turns out the electricity's not on in the apartment. We're not going to be able to move in the groceries. But let's figure out what else we can do. Okay, well, maybe the welcome, or whoever's moving in the starting essentials can do just the dry goods, and they can bring those refrigerated items to YMCA's office and we'll bring them in later. Or maybe they'll bring everything to YMCA's office and we'll move it in. Coming up with those alternate solutions is helpful. And cultural differences, I'm sure y'all touched on this in some of your webinars. That's something that, you know, we'll always be talking about. And it's something that, again, training is always helpful with. It's helpful for volunteers to understand that there's a lot of things that we do here in the US every day that we don't think about as cultural norms. We don't think about it as like a cultural practice or whatever, because we just do it. That's the way everything is, right? But it is. And for somebody coming out into the country as a newcomer, whatever you're doing is kind of weird to them too. Helping them understand that from both ends, from the client end as well, that there might be different cultural differences in how people interact is important. How to be respectful of that as well. A big one is the role of the case manager and when to call agency staff. And this is also where one of the benefits comes in for having Houston Welcomes Refugees on our side. So if we were running our own community sponsorship program at YMCA, we didn't have an external organization, and maybe we didn't have a staff that was kind of overseeing, or even if we did, the person who's getting all the calls is going to be the case manager. The case manager is already dealing with 1,000 things, right? So certain situations, it's really, they're the last person you should call. Houston Welcomes Refugees and YMCA have worked together really well to kind of make a protocol and make that very clear to volunteers. Okay, you call this person first. For their welcome teams, for example, they have a welcome team. They have a team leader, and then they have a team mentor, somebody who's led a team before. They also have multiple people on their own staff, and then there's YMCA staff they contact. So it's a while until you get to a case manager, unless of course it's an emergency. But that is always a constant challenge, and just making clear again to different folks what the role of the case manager is, what services are they actually supposed to provide, because sometimes that's not clear to the client either. Sometimes the client's like, okay, my case manager didn't go to the grocery store for me. I've been here for 2 months. My case manager didn't take me to the grocery store today. That's not really their role. You know, helping figure that out. Emergency situations are always a challenge, but having, like I said, a protocol in place, knowing who to contact on either side is key for that. And then navigating systems, navigating healthcare, navigating Social Security, USCIS, benefits offices. There are certain systems that many volunteers have been used to. Those are the systems that we navigate all the time. You know, if you have kids, you know how to enroll them in school, or even if you don't have kids, you kind of understand what forms are asking for. But other systems like Social Security office is like a beast of its own. And that's why we have case managers, right? So it's really important. That's why it's important to have those guidelines clearly defined, who is doing what. That's why it's not co-sponsorship, it's community sponsorship. So who gets to do what, and time commitment, which is why we have a lot of options for people. It is a huge time commitment to be on a welcome team, but maybe you can't do that, and that's okay. You can do, you know, a starting essentials. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Morgan now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Bass. I am the Friendship Program Manager for Houston Welcomes Refugees. And what that looks like, I know that you've heard them mention terms about welcome teams and our friendship program. And so essentially, I oversee all of the volunteers that are agreeing to be on a welcome team, which is generally 4 to 6 people who for 6 months are agreeing to walk with a refugee family, befriend them, and essentially integrate into each other's lives as you would with any new friend. And so we're going to talk about how that relates to the benefits and best practices that we see through our relationship teams. And so this has kind of been the YMCA in terms mentioned already, but just to reiterate, just having access to refugees through our partnership with the Resettlement Agency, we literally would not have that if we did not have these partnerships. So that's very important. We get information and education directly from the agency. So information about what are the larger trends happening in refugee arrival and resettlement? What are the trends that are taking place just in our own city? But also what are the things that we need to be aware of to educate our volunteers or just to be educated as our own organization? There's also increased volunteer support because of this, because we have information that we can give from the Resettlement Agency directly to our volunteers so that they're educated and they're informed and as they're building those relationships with refugee families. And additionally, through this partnership, refugees receive immediate friendship to prevent crisis. So instead of kind of being crisis, let's help them, let's have people
Morgan,
be reactive, like, oh, these
cutting
refugee
out for
families are in crisis, come alongside them. We have people that are there to pick them up at the airport.
Hey, Morgan, can you pause? Is Morgan cutting out for everyone? Okay, I'll jump in. So what Morgan was getting to with the refugees receive immediate friendship to prevent crisis is oftentimes our volunteers who have a heart for refugees will meet refugees when they're in crisis. Just the community will, because they'll be in the apartment complex and meet someone that's not with the YMCA that needs help. And through our partnership with the YMCA, like I mentioned before, and like Morgan mentioned, our welcome teams actually meet the refugees at the airport. So they already have these friendships built into place. So when they do have a simple question that maybe the caseworker doesn't have time to answer, our volunteers can step in and help. And so we help prevent those crises from coming up because we're constantly there supporting them. So that's really one of the benefits of working with the YMCA. And as Morgan mentioned before too, we just have a really great understanding of the resettlement process thanks to Miranda and her team. They are constantly keeping us up to date on how long is it taking for families to get food stamps? How long should the families expect for rent to be paid? What are some of the resources that the refugees have access to that they might not be fully aware? Maybe they were told day 2, but they were going through a lot day 2, so they don't remember them come 2 months later. Our volunteers have documents from Miranda and her team readily available to them that they can quickly look these things up and give those answers to the refugee family. So our volunteers feel really well equipped. And then some best practices, which we've already talked about, is just consistent communication. Miranda mentioned this. We have a weekly phone call with Miranda and her team between our staff and their staff, talking about who's arriving in the coming few weeks. What do they need? What do you guys know about the family that would help us best support this family? And so we have those weekly calls, but truly someone from the HWR staff and someone from the YMCA staff are talking daily. Might be quick text messages with updates, but there's daily communication. Just because, like Miranda said, things change regularly. Even then, sometimes I think our volunteers get a good picture of resettlement. A couple of weeks ago, our welcome team was with the caseworker waiting at the airport. The family never showed up. They didn't make their connection. And so I think it gave our volunteers a really great insight. The caseworkers have all the information and things are still changing and it's beyond their control, right? So we just try to make sure that our volunteers really know that. And then another best practice is for clear pathways for volunteers. At our orientations where we talk about who refugees are, what the resettlement process is like, we make it very clear how volunteers can volunteer with us, be it donating those welcome kits, those starting essentials, or serving on a move-in team, or serving a welcome team. We're very clear on what those pathways are, and we're very clear on the expectations they have. So I don't think anyone will come into a volunteer opportunity with us not knowing exactly what they're getting into. I think that's really important. And just those clear pathways. We make it, and I'll walk through those steps. We make the steps very clear. People know what the process is to volunteer with refugees through us and through the YMCA. And then volunteer experience and support. If we have a bunch of volunteers on here, you know that if you're going to volunteer again with an organization, you need to have a good experience and you need to feel supported. And those are two things that are key to what Morgan does as the Friendship Program Manager. Morgan has a 60-page welcome team guide that she gives to every welcome team volunteer. If they have a question, if they need support, it can be found in there. We are constantly available to answer questions so they feel supported without having to call the caseworker. I started volunteering refugees about 7 years ago, before HWR was a thing. And with a different agency, and I know that the caseworker had to hate me. I called and asked questions about every little thing. I'm so embarrassed by it now because now I have a fuller understanding of all the things the caseworker is doing and how trivial my questions were. So we just try to make sure our volunteers know that up front. And I think this here is a really great picture of what Morgan does with volunteer onboarding. So that first step is everyone that wants to get involved with us in any way, even if they don't want to get involved with us, they just want to learn about refugees. The first step is come to an orientation. It's that 1 hour and we take attendance so we know who's attended and who hasn't. And then you can do welcome kits. That's really easy. Next step, do welcome kits, donate those, run to Target, put a kit together, drop them off at our warehouse. Move-in team, once you say you're interested in that, you'll be on our weekly emails where you can see who's arriving over the next 2 weeks and how you can step into one of the 4 roles we have, be it delivering kits, going to the grocery store, going to get the hot meal. And then if you want to be on a welcome team, it's a bit of a process. You have to submit an application to Morgan and her team. It's pretty lengthy, but it just lets us get to know those volunteers. And then after you submit a welcome team application, Morgan and her team will interview those volunteers for about 10 to 15 minutes just to get to know them a little bit better, hear their schedules, understand their motivation for serving. And then once they've gone through that, we will invite them to welcome team training. So this welcome team training is about 3 hours long, and it goes through exactly what Miranda has touched on. Cultural differences. What are some do's and don'ts? Let's talk about what these cultural differences make our volunteers a little bit aware of it. Talk through who the caseworkers are, what they do, what they're expected to do, what we're expected to do, and how we can step in and help, and how we can not bog them down with questions. Kind of go through when to ask questions and who to ask those questions to. But we also set expectations. I think a lot of volunteers come in thinking it's going to be their new best friend. It's going to be this joyful occasion. There's going to be no hurdles. So we talk through, here are some common hurdles. Here are some common issues that we see as you're building these cross-cultural relationships. Here's some things not to do, right? Don't buy them a car. Don't try to buy all these things for these families. You're going to end up hurting. We talk a lot about how we can empower rather than enable. So that's a big part of our training. And then after that, they meet their family, they meet their welcome team, and they engage with the family for about 6 months. So that's our process. And we do feel like the best practice in all of this is just clear communication between the co-sponsor, the community sponsor, and the resettlement agency, so us and Miranda's team, but also between our organization and our volunteers, very clearly stating how to volunteer with us and those next steps and what it's going to look like. So here you can see a few pictures of us doing move-ins, doing orientations with some kids, welcoming families at airports, and that's just a picture of who we are. But that's all we have to share, but we would love to answer any questions anyone has.
Okay, so we can now begin answering any questions submitted during today's presentation. And as a reminder, anyone with us can submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. I know that everyone shared a lot of interesting information. So my guess is we have a few questions for you all. Let me see. One of the first, someone was asking, there was a mention of interpretation and how you all handle interpretation.
Yeah, I can answer that one. So for every welcome team that Morgan deploys, that she sends out, they have access to an interpretation service. So those volunteers can request a translator for a social event. They can request it for a medical appointment, request it for a variety of things. And then our organization pays for those hours. So we will pay up to, we say about 8 to 10 hours per team is what we budget for, but we often use more than that. We let our teams use more than that. We know that clear communication is a really huge you need that to build a friendship. So we are happy to budget that into our annual funding for this program. And our volunteers frequently use it for, like I said, medical appointments, but also just like social events. If they're going to have the family over for Thanksgiving, they can ask a translator to come over and help communicate, the family communicate well with everyone in attendance. It's also a way to build friendship. So if you're trying to build a relationship with a new refugee, a great way to do that is to offer a translator to go with them to their medical appointment, or maybe they have a legal appointment or school enrollment that we can help come in and pay for.
Great. And then you mentioned your starting essentials and then the people that that move in the supplies. Is there a reason that is that often two different groups, like one person collects and then one person or another group moves in? And just a little, why do you all use that process?
Yes. So we have a warehouse where we keep all of these welcome kits. So we love for churches and schools and other organizations to put these kits together as groups, and they donate them. So oftentimes we'll have a church that puts together 15 bathroom kits on a Saturday, right? And they bring those there. While they can do that on a Saturday, they might not have availability to go then deliver those kits to an apartment complex on a Tuesday, right? And we don't need 50 bathroom kits on a Tuesday at an apartment complex. So we have a warehouse that we keep all of our inventory of those kits. And those volunteers may not, or may be intimidated to spend time with refugees, or may not have the capacity. They can go to Walmart, they can go to Target, they may be already there. They can put those kits together and drop them off at our warehouse anytime that's convenient for them. And so then the move-in teams, those are individuals that have the capacity during the weekday over the lunch hour. So we hope that that allows for people, even if they do have full-time jobs, to serve in that way. They can come, they pick up kits from our warehouse, the specific kits that family needs. They pick those kits up and then deliver them to the apartment. And then they have someone else that will deliver groceries and deliver groceries and a hot meal, right? And also by having those two separate teams, it allows our team to take in with those volunteers that donate welcome kits we take those in, but we also quality control those. So we know for sure that every kit that goes into our inventory has all brand new items and exactly what we want in those, right? So we know a family's not going to be missing anything. If volunteers were just to go straight to the apartment and get those kits themselves and bring them there, it would be hard for our team in the YMCA to verify exactly what was given to the refugee families, right? And all volunteers do their best, right? They want to follow the instructions well, but sometimes they might miss a pot or might miss a spatula or might miss a towel or something. And we just want to make sure that all refugees have exactly what we've asked them to provide. And just to serve them with dignity and honor that they're brand new, nice items that the refugees are receiving. So it gives us
let's
a way
see,
to
and then
quality control that.
yeah, thank you. And then Miranda, I believe you mentioned like the case manager sometimes meets the team or what have you. Can you talk a little bit about that handoff or introduction, or how you structure that between any USCRI staff and any of the Houston Welcomes Refugees volunteers?
So, I mean, there's not really a handoff because there's still our clients. And it's not a co-sponsorship, meaning that we're still providing all of the core services, or we're still required. Like if there's something that's not done, it's on YMCA, right? So what we do is a member of HWR staff, Houston Welcomes Refugees staff, emails the case manager in that spreadsheet that I discussed earlier. That's a shared spreadsheet with the case number, family name, arrival date, whatever else. It also has the caseworker. So Houston Welcomes Refugees has their own, we provide them the email and phone number for all of our case managers. They'll send an email to the case manager, hey, with the case manager and the welcome team leader. This is so-and-so, they're gonna be the welcome team leader for this family, arriving on whatever date. You know, if there's something you need them to do, please let them know, blah, 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 blah. And then that way and it starts off by email on purpose, because what we don't want is for somebody to be calling the case manager all the time. So then the case manager, we have a list that has the services that is provided to the volunteers, that has our list of services, right? And you can see which are the services that only a case manager should do. So included in that, for example, is food stamps application. And that's for a reason. In Texas, the food stamps application is thorough, and getting it approved is a beast. So, you know, it's important to have the case manager do that, and only the case manager. There's other services that the volunteer can help when the case manager asks them to. School enrollment, for example. But we don't want the volunteer to do it if the case manager is not initiating that, because then what happens is, oh, well, the case manager comes to the client, okay, we're going to do school registration today. Oh, well, my volunteer already did it for me. And then it's a whole, whatever, right? But it is a big help for a volunteer to do school enrollment. So you'll have the case manager has the volunteer's information. They're able to send it over. Whatever documents are needed, whatever information, what the school is, all of that. Or if there's an emergency situation, the volunteer team leader has the case manager's information to let them know, because that is who needs to know. If somebody, ends up in the hospital, somebody's baby was born, whatever. There are things that sometimes the volunteers know, but the case managers don't. But in terms of a handoff, there's not always a handoff that takes place. Ideally, they meet them at the airport. That doesn't always happen for whatever reason. Sometimes they can just show up the next day. Case manager doesn't necessarily have to be there. They can have an interpreter. And that also helps with creating the boundary between, okay, this is Houston Welcomes Refugees, this is YMCA, right? So it's kind of more clear to a newcomer. These are separate, individual or separate groups. They have different purposes. So if I have a problem with my social security card, I'm supposed to call my case manager. I'm not supposed to call my volunteer. But it happens all the time, right?
Great. Yeah, let's see, we don't have too much more time, but a few more quick questions. One quick one for maybe Morgan, if we'll see, we'll have Hannah mention it if the internet doesn't pull through. But your training, is it online or is it like via Zoom or in person, Morgan?
We alternate every month. So 1 month will be an in-person training, 1 month will be an online training. And so it just depends on the month. So this week we have an online training and then next month will be an in-person training. But we just try to accommodate that. Some people, it's easier to do online, but we still want to engage with people in person as much as we can, just to kind of have that just like greater relational equity, if we can do that by meeting our volunteers and having those times to have those side conversations on breaks and things like that, just so that the volunteers can feel connected to our staff.
Great. And then another question, I'm not sure who would most want to respond, but do you all do anything as far as like wrap up for, you mentioned, I think that it was the welcome teams or maybe like a 6-month commitment or what have you. What kind of like wrap up or things do you do for that?
At the 6-month point, they get what is called a roll-off form. They would give them formal correspondence to say, hey, you're now officially rolling off of your 6-month commitment. Of course, if you have built friendship with them, we want you to continue in that friendship. You don't have to cut that off. But as far as, logging hours for our timesheet that goes to the resettlement agency, we don't have to do that anymore. And we also give them a form to kind of respond, to share about what their volunteer experience was like, just so that we can have a gauge of where we need to make improvements if needed. And additionally, we have a team mentor that oversees each welcome team that's been on that team before, and they facilitate kind of like a debriefing meeting with that team to make sure that they have space to share experiences or just any thoughts that they have. And all of that can be relayed back to our program, because we just want to make sure that with each welcome team, we're evaluating what went well, what didn't, so that we can make changes if needed.
Very cool. And
the
one last
debrief
question.
meeting, it sounds kind of like formal, right? But it is a celebration as well. Usually there's snacks and a hangout to celebrate the fact that this family's been here for 6 months and that the team welcomed them.
Snacks are always good at any meeting. And maybe one last question, and this might be for Miranda, but someone was wondering, why have you gone with this model versus like a traditional sponsorship, model?
There's a lot of reasons. So I think that I came into this after it had already started. So I can't speak to that, but I don't know that we would have had the capacity. It takes a lot of capacity on the agency side to be able to do community sponsorship is great, and I think people should do it wherever they can, however they can. But it's important to acknowledge that it does take a lot of work on the agency side to facilitate that. All what we've been discussing, what HWR staff does, it's a lot. And as I said before, we don't, on the agency side, our money is tied up. We may not have staff funding for, Houston Welcomes Refugees has 5 full-time staff now, 8 full-time staff now. So, we can't do that. It's really helpful to have it as an outside organization. I have done also community sponsorships outside of HWR. I've had a few groups that have come in and done them on their own, and they've worked okay, but to have those point people is very helpful. Also, they have their own board, they have their own networking. They're a faith-based organization, so they connect with a lot of churches, and they're able to go out to those churches and do different things. They have a different relationship with them than the agency does.
And I can answer a little on our end too, why we have not done a full community sponsorship. And I think for us, it's volunteer mobilization, right? We want to see the community at large welcoming refugees really well. Community sponsorship requires a lot of time, a lot of skill set, and financial support too, right? You're doing a lot financially. Volunteering with us, you are expected, if you're not like welcome kits, obviously those require some financial support, right? You're putting together a kit, the kit might be $150 worth of goods. That does require some financial if you're going to do that. If you're going to serve on a welcome team and really engage both the family, we say it requires $0. We just want your time. We want you to come in, love, and welcome the family well. So it's a lot easier to recruit volunteers to welcome a family when there are no major requirements of financial support, or you're not expected to help them apply for food stamps. You're not expected to find them an apartment. You're not expected to drive them to every medical appointment, right? You're really expected to sit down and have tea and share meals with them and build a friendship. It's a lot easier to recruit volunteers that way.
Yeah, and it also breaking it up between, as we discussed before, but between those different services, like you might have one group that's collecting the items, another group that's moving the items into the home, and then a third group that's serving as the welcome team. You are able to cast a much wider net. The amount of people that are actually able to serve on a welcome team is quite small. I wouldn't be able to do it. I don't have enough time. So because it is a really big commitment, but you're still able to reach those people, and then they're able to go out into their community, talk about refugees. Hey, they can correct some, but people say wrong things about refugees all the time. They're able to go and say, hey, actually, that's not true. They're able to really advocate for resettlement.
Yeah, no, that is wonderful. And I think thank you so much to all of you. This has been wonderful, just sharing with us people that might be considering this kind of model. But I think even if even if this model isn't right for folks out there, I think that we all learn something, or a piece of what you all are doing that we can adopt, and certainly impressive. And I have no doubt it benefits the refugees of Houston. So thanks again to all of our presenters today, and thank you to everyone who has joined us on today's Lunch and Learn. Also, we would love to hear from you, and we'd like to hear your feedback on today's Lunch and Learn and hear your suggestions for future Lunch and Learn topics. Please take a minute and complete the survey. You can use your phone to follow the QR code on the screen, or you can follow the link in the chat, and it will also be included in a follow-up email. And like I said, you will receive a follow-up email today, and it will also include a link to a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of Refugee Welcome Collective, thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you all.
How do I leave this?